Well, hey there. Welcome back to the After the Sermon podcast, this place where we dig into the text from Sunday's sermon and give some more details or context or things that we couldn't get into, as well as just some reminders of the application, the truths contained therein, and just some stuff to encourage us as we continue through this week. I am Pastor Ben, here with Pastor Matt.
Hey guys.
And I made the joke last week that I didn't know what Ecclesiastes meant, and I think in that same era, I also thought that this book was named Job, and it is not.
It is not.
But
named Job.
Sometimes we might think that a job is suffering, and so we're close.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything since I love my job. That was a good setup. I love both of my jobs. They are the best, just in case my boss is listening. You know,
The Lord is always listening, Matt.
the Lord is always listening. The Lord is always listening.
Yes. Well, we work for God, not for man, right?
Yeah. Which Job's name, there's a lot of speculation, but some would say it's enemy suffering. It's related to that. So I guess you could say your job is suffering if it is. It would be true, right? But anyways, on that note,
Yeah. Well, and that is the theme, though, of
yeah,
Job's life as it is written out here through a pretty lengthy book. Again, also part of our wisdom literature, written in sort of this poetic fashion, and starts pretty dramatically with the scene in heaven and Satan going to the Lord and asking for permission to do terrible things to Job, and then a good bit of it being the well-intended but poorly thought out conversations of Job's friends, and then finally ending with a response from God himself. So we think that the Bible is boring. Job has plenty of theatrics in it. But on Sunday, we really dealt with a question that many people ask, and maybe people are still asking, of, why is there suffering? Why do the righteous suffer? Right? What is the purpose of suffering?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's just an incredible book. It's actually, I think this is the longest book we've had to cover just as one, like in one sermon. And we're about to hit some books where we're covering just one story out of the book. But I mentioned this to you, is this sermon almost feels like a sermon about suffering and not about Job. But at the same time, when you look at Job's life, you think suffering. That's what the whole book is about. And in the midst of that, that's, I think, what many of us can think our lives are all about. Like, good grief, I can't catch a break. I'm constantly dealing with this, or I'm navigating that. And suffering, the mentioned Sunday, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And it takes on so many different perspectives, right? Like, you and I are both very familiar with car trouble, right? And so that is a form of suffering. But for others, it's not suffering at all. They can just go buy a new car, right? And it is what it is. There's health suffering, financial suffering, there's family suffering. I mentioned on Sunday, telling just a personal story of how in the midst of studying, I took this class in seminary where for a whole week we studied the book of Job. And in the midst of all that class, Julie and I suffered our first miscarriage. And so, like, that suffering, there's so much suffering in the world. And so to talk about it is good, because I think there's maybe not so much now in our Christian culture, but I know for me growing up, it is what it is, move on, right? That's how suffering was treated in the church, or at least that was my experience, because it's inevitable. So just suck it up. You don't have to grieve it, move on. But that's not how suffering works. And it's not how we respond always. And so to have a book like Job, and even like Lamentations, where we get to see suffering in light of the sovereignty of God and for our purpose of our sanctification, is very good and very helpful. And we need to develop a theology of suffering. and what it means to suffer as Christian.
Yeah, I think it's it's easy to want to focus on, the good things, the abundant life and the blessings and the provision, and obviously when you take those too far, you end up in the prosperity gospel,
Right.
and you misalign your thinking to then, well, if something bad is happening, I'm doing something wrong.
Correct.
But we know from John 16, Jesus says, and you will have suffering in this world, you will have trouble, right? And then that's Jesus in his
Jesus
life
suffered.
clearly had trouble. Yes.
Right. So if did Jesus do something wrong? This is why I hate the prosperity gospel, and I can't wait for it to burn in hell forever. Is that too bold of a statement to make on the podcast?
Well, no, it's going to live its best life.
Oh, it will. Man, like, because to say, oh, if you're suffering, and this is what Job's friends do. We didn't even really get into that in the sermon. You must be doing something wrong if you're suffering. Then explain to me, Jesus. Jesus, you must be doing something wrong as these nails are going into your hands. I mean, so
Well,
suffering is inevitable, and it's not an indicator of our faith. And God uses it to strengthen our faith. This is what the book of James tells us to.
yeah, and it's if you're not thinking the full context of the book of Job and you're reading some of the arguments that the friends make, they sound
Oh, sound good?
good. Yeah, it's like, of course, God, the wicked don't do well, and God, protects the righteous and all these things, but they, a not that you're actually asking them, but they didn't know about Jesus.
Mm.
But they don't have the helpful context of that first two chapters setting up, okay, where is the suffering? What is the source of this suffering? What's the, you know,
Mm.
but even without either of those things, it's unwise to just associate, because even the book of Ecclesiastes and in Proverbs, there we see, like, sometimes the unrighteous, to our perspective, go unpunished, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the full are not wealthy. There's things we can observe, but the way that Job's friends, they have such a black and white understanding of things that they just say, well, if you are experiencing suffering, then it must mean that God does not love you.
Right. You
And
even look at it. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
I'm just gonna say it's easy to accidentally get surrounded by that kind of Christian ease, even in today's world.
Yeah. Because when you look at it, the question of why do, and it's a good question. I think it's a valid question. I'm not saying stop asking the question, but why don't the wicked suffer? The reality is, though, we, knowing what we believe, we would never want to change shoes with them, because their suffering is to come. And so the suffering on earth is paradise compared to the suffering of eternal damnation. And in light of that, we ask the question, okay, what is God doing in my life? What is he doing in this? And it's hard to, and I'm not saying that's really hard to think through and ask in the middle of it, right? No one's thinking about their future as they're drowning. They're immediately trying to figure out what's going on now, which is what Job is doing. And it isn't until his confrontation with God at the very end where God doesn't reveal the answer. He just reveals, I'm God. So really, the book of Job is not a book about suffering. It's a book about God's sovereignty. And when we understand God's sovereignty, then we look at suffering a lot different. And because Job responds, I know my Redeemer lives. He worships. The Christian life is not a easy life, but it is a good one, because the Lord is seeking to make us like himself.
Yeah, and that process of sanctification, that refining, those ways in which God brings us closer to him. Again, Job reminds us, although we know that suffering and sin go hand in hand,
Yeah.
it's the purpose of the suffering is not always necessarily a punishment or a response or a reaction to something that's being done wrong, but
Yeah.
instead that God is doing something to bring something right in us,
God works all things together for our good. And so I'm constantly learning, and suffering, as I mentioned Sunday, and I've already mentioned on the podcast, suffering doesn't mean someone died. It literally could just be a stretch of just really hard days and months where you're not at peace and you're wrestling, and so it could just be that. And it's, what is the Lord teaching me in this moment? And usually it's after the fact where you're like, hey, he was teaching me that I have control issues and I don't trust him enough. He was teaching me that I was prideful. He was teaching me that I was quick to anger. I was quick to speak and quick to anger, right? And this is how the Lord produces maturity in his children, is by bringing suffering. Yet at the same time, as Job says, though he slays me, yet I will praise him. And that is countercultural, because we know when we get to heaven, we'll understand the fuller picture.
Yeah, it reminds me too of, you mentioned just briefly Lamentations, and that we have these books that talk about suffering, because again, suffering is a universal, timeless thing, not just a new thing, and not something that's even just, well, it was before Christ, and so now that Jesus has come, there's no more suffering. It's just not the case. But Lamentations 3, the probably super well-known verses in the middle there, that, there's new mercies from the Lord every morning, great is your faithfulness. But just a few verses later, in verse 31, chapter 3, he says, for the Lord will not cast off forever, for though he cause grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men. Right? Some other translations say it does not bring joy to God to bring grief to mankind. But even inside those few verses, right, he is compassionate, and it's truly, it's because he loves us enough not just to save us from sin in an ultimate sense, but to sanctify us.
Right.
And so, although we don't always understand it, or will never understand it, sometimes that process requires suffering.
Right. And I know, especially if you're a mature Christian, a seasoned Christian, or older Christian, however you want to describe that, is we can't just forget that these are some truths that we have to wrestle with. And I don't think this is a truth that we may, I mean, it could be, it very well could be, where we go and listen to a sermon and we're like, oh, okay, God's got this, everything's fine. But to wrestle with it and sit and to know that, hey, God's for me. I know that to be true. He's not against me. So if he's for me, then he must be doing something. He's working for our good. Job sees is hypocritical. And it's like, oh, he only loves you because it's easy. But Job is a man of Job. Suffering reveals our character, it reveals our idols, it reveals our weaknesses, and that's good. It's a good thing. Not easy to grasp or wrestle with, but it is a good thing.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes it is just even the recognition of, this is causing me to suffer.
Yeah.
Right? We sometimes maybe want to deny that or push it away or go, I don't really want to deal with that, because it's a hurt, and I shouldn't have to deal with that hurt. But again, it doesn't always have to be. Obviously, Job has an extreme tragedy described in his life there, but it doesn't have to be the death of all your family and the destruction of all your personal property.
Right.
Suffering to be something God's using in order to bring your attention, the part of your life that he needs to.
Yeah. And what a joy that is. And that's why James says, count it all joy when you face these trials, because God is after your heart. I mean, we'll spend our whole lives working through that. I really do believe that. And when we get to heaven, on the other side of this eternity, when there is no more suffering, we will rejoice fully in what God has done in us and through us.
As you said, Job's a long book. If you've never read it, make sure that as you go in to study it, do not take advice from chapters 3 through even or 38, whatever point God shows up
Yeah.
Be careful with those rip-a-day calendars that might pull a verse from Job that sounds good, because depending on who's saying it, might
Yep.
not create theology there. But definitely, it's a good book to study and to wrestle with. And
Yep.
again, we're not going to fully understand everything about it, but we can hold to the conclusions that Job comes to.
Yeah.
Right, because Job doesn't understand either. He doesn't get answers, and that's okay.
Yep. Yep.
So we are currently in summer mode, but I definitely don't want you to miss out on summer event. So just check out the app where we have our summer hangouts handout. If you did not get it, the little bookmark there, or always in our program. James Bible studies coming up. If you haven't been to one yet, jump in. No prerequisites. But men's coming up this coming Saturday, and then women's the following Friday, last Friday in the month. As well as some other things coming up. I know life groups, some of them are getting together for some different things. Some of them already have just to hang out or do whatever. And if you haven't been a part of a life group, come talk to myself or Pastor Matt or Darren. And, if you want to get to know people, these summer hangouts or these kind of impromptu, informal life group gatherings, again, welcome, open. We want people to continue to build and make those connections in our church community. But whether we see you at one of those or we don't see you till next Sunday morning, don't ever hesitate to reach out if you need anything. We will keep working our way through the story of grace. God bless.